Welcome, everybody. How's Ignite so far? Good? So this is, just to give you some context, this is a continuation of, sort of drill down, rather, on Lee's keynote, specifically on the part where he said, and there's more, right? So at the very end, not where he had his face with the finger pointing that Mark didn't like, before that. So this is a GlobalProtect cloud service. A little deep dive on what this is. We couldn't actually name the session that in the beginning, so what you registered for, hopefully it fits. If it doesn't, apologies in advance, but we had to come up with a generic description before we started. Very excited to brief you on this. It's been sort of, since I started with Palo Alto Networks, it's been about 10 months. Been working on this project, which had started a little bit before I joined. And as you heard today, we announced it. It was 4 press releases today, one of which was on this service describing a little bit what it is, and some SD-WAN partners that are also participating in this. So in this session, in the next 50 minutes that I have, I'll brief you on what it is, first of all, how it applies to you, when you should consider it, or versus building it yourself, et cetera. So let's get started. Of course, I don't know if I mentioned my name. I might have forgotten. My name is Elie, Palo Alto Networks. Good to have you here. So Lee had mentioned this. He said traditionally your network was there. So all the things used to be hosted in data center, and now, of course, everybody's painfully aware it's not anymore. There's still maybe some things there, but lots of things are in public cloud. Lots of things using a SaaS service for, like Office 365. Certainly, we do that. So there's many things up here. You might have workloads in AWS and Azure. And of course, this service deals with, as mentioned before, with remote networks and mobile users, which, like you said, users are everywhere. We're here today. Our whole company is using our GlobalProtect agents on our mobile devices to connect back to corp and get internet access that's secure. And this service deals with how do you provide security at all locations with the same level of security we've been offering all along for data centers. So let's focus on that. We're going to be talking about those. Here, I believe we have security covered with Aperture. We have VM series for public cloud. And so the challenges and the problem that we were trying to solve is essentially how do you apply security for mobile users and branches at scale and able to adapt to rapid changes. So where I'm from, I'm Canadian. I'm from the East Coast, or East Coast-ish. We have snowstorms. So you've heard the snowmageddon term before, or maybe not. That's where people start connecting from home, and there's a spike in demand. How do you deal with that if you've deployed something in a particular location that has a fixed capacity? It's tough to scale. Either you have to buy enough of it to account for that, or use an alternative solution. So we're hoping that this service gives you an alternative solution to that, solve that problem. Next would be the remote locations. So remote locations might be retail stores, might be workloads or networks running in the cloud, it might be remote offices. So we're solving for that. Do we have solutions for that today? We do, but we'll talk about what the differences are with the service versus what you have today. So let's look at how this problem is being solved right now. And I've briefed roughly since starting this project about 125 customers, mostly over Zoom calls and so on, and conference calls. What I'm seeing is a lot of MPLS connected branch offices to a central site or a colo where they hairpin through that central site. Of course, there's some cost associated with MPLS and poor performance or low bandwidth typically in the US. I know there's slightly different scenarios for APAC and Europe with that scenario, but generally speaking, lower bandwidth, more expense. Or you've gone the IPsec route and you're still backhauling, but you've decided to buy broadband circuits because it's certainly more cost effective, but you're still hairpinning or backhauling through a central location, so there's still a poor performance if the distance is very great between the branch and the central location. So we see this going on, and we're trying to solve for that case. How many of you fall into this category? You're backhauling branch offices or remote locations, just to show of hands. Okay, good. So many very much in line with the customers I've seen. Now, there's some alternative approaches that have been used to try to solve some of these problems of on-net, off-net security posture, or to account for users moving in and out of the office. So there's many technologies there. There's secure in a gateway, secure web gateway, proxy solutions, not naming any vendors or anything like that, but there's alternative solutions being used there. Now what that does is create a gap in the security posture. Why? Because you have multiple management consoles. I've spoken to customers with Panorama managing on-prem firewalls, plus something maybe managing branch firewalls, whether they're routers or small firewalls in branch, and possibly a third managing this proxy or secure web gateway solution. And you have to somehow synchronize the security policy between all those technologies. So even if it's just URL filtering list, trying to synchronize URL filtering lists between 3 vendors takes some effort, let's just say, skill set, and people, and so on, people cost. So it creates some gaps in the security posture by doing that. Also, the point I didn't mention is, you know, if you think about it, you're hairpinning through some of these locations unnecessarily, because maybe 20 years ago, the apps were hosted in the data center or colo. Now, where are the apps? Where are the apps now? They're in the cloud somewhere. It's either a SaaS app or just on the internet somewhere. And to hairpin through and use up all the bandwidth and all the problems that come with hairpinning or backhauling doesn't make sense when the end destination of where you're trying to go isn't where you're hairpinning through. It's actually somewhere else. So those are the problems we're trying to solve now. If you do this yourself, as mentioned earlier in the keynote, it's complex to manage 3 technologies. You have to have the staff. There's licenses to contend with, renewals, and so on, of multiple technologies, making it all work together. So this is what customers are doing today, and they're looking for alternatives. So that's kind of drove why we built this service. So you might ask yourself, wait a minute, I think Palo Alto has, you know, technologies, products, software to solve this problem today. And you use it, and we have customers deploying it, and you'd be right. So we have VM series in public cloud. We have small hardware, large hardware, Panorama that ties everything together. We have GlobalProtect agents for the mobile devices, and you could do this yourself. In fact, we have customers doing exactly what we've done with the service themselves, but it is operationally inefficient to do that if you have a limited staff, and we're asked to do more and more with less people. So customers are looking for alternatives, and this is essentially an alternative solution for what you can already do today. So this introduces the service. It used to have a code name. Now it has an official name. I'm actually quite relieved that I can actually talk about it freely. GlobalProtect Cloud Service. Just to describe the hierarchy of the service, we have GlobalProtect as sort of the overarching umbrella name. Below that, you have GlobalProtect Cloud Service, which is what we announced today. And the traditional GlobalProtect subscription that you're used to is the other component, which is unchanged. So you still buy GlobalProtect to attach it to a hardware firewall, or you buy GlobalProtect subscription to attach it to a VM series. That part hasn't changed, just we've added a cloud service under the overall umbrella name of GlobalProtect, just to make that clear. So now, why we chose from the cloud to deliver it from public cloud, it's very important, as opposed to a colo only or tier 1 or tier 2 provider only. And the reason is kind of related to what Nir said earlier this morning, is that first you choose to disrupt the space and you find out how to do it. Now, in order to do that disruption properly, we needed to scale and leverage the elastic scaling of the cloud, as opposed to a data center. We have a fixed assets in POPs around the world. So what happens when there is 10 customers like yourselves that all fly to a huge conference somewhere, like let's say Frankfurt. Everybody goes to Frankfurt from multiple companies, and now you have 50,000 people, of which maybe half of them are using a particular vendor's technology, and they've deployed in a POP in Frankfurt. Well, how many racks of equipment do they have, whether it's an appliance or software running on a hypervisor? It doesn't matter. The number of assets there and the ability to burst is limited, just from the fact that they've deployed it somewhere in a colo. So we've chosen not to do that on purpose and deploy this in public cloud. Now, we will have many public cloud vendors. We might supplement it with colos and data centers, but the cloud needs to be part of that solution for the elastic scaling. That's a very important piece, and it was a conscious decision on the part of Palo Alto Networks. So there's 2 use cases. One is the remote network use case. This is to onboard your remote location. So as I mentioned, it's retail locations, branch offices, or remote networks. The way you do this is with an IPsec tunnel. So you establish an IPsec tunnel from whatever equipment is there. We don't require that you have a Palo Alto equipment in the branch. It could be a router that does IPsec, that talks IPsec, and you onboard that location to the cloud service. Now, with that, you get an added benefit immediately of having a full mesh VPN created for you. So all we require is an IPsec tunnel from a branch to the cloud service, another IPsec tunnel from your other branch to the cloud service, and in the cloud, we make sure there's a full mesh VPN there. So the plumbing we create, and if your policy allows it, of course, branch A could talk to branch B. That's up to you, but at least the plumbing is there. That prevents you from having to create a full mesh in the technology on the router or firewalls that you're using, because that could be challenging as well. So you get that added benefit of it's automatically meshed, and it to be precise, which is a differentiator, as you'll see in the us versus competition slide that I talk about. This is a bidirectional service, not an outbound service only. That's very important. We use Panorama to consume this service. Just to be clear, the only way to consume this service is from Panorama with a new plugin that we've developed, much like the NSX plugin if you use NSX. How many here have Panorama and are using NSX, just so I know? So, okay. So it's familiar. If you use NSX, you had to have installed this Panorama plugin. We've developed a new plugin that adds functionality to Panorama to be able to use this service. So you install that, and that's the only way to consume the service. There's no other portal, no public cloud portals to log into or anything else. And we give you all the subscriptions, the main ones. So we have URL filtering, we have threat protection, and we have Wildfire, and autofocus and aperture are optional add-ons if you have that already or if you buy it afterwards. Now, why do we, and premium support, those are all included in either of these cloud services, in this cloud service for this use case. So why did we do that? Let me explain. So we ran into a lot of situations where the full security stack was at headquarters, where you'd have all the subscriptions being purchased. And for a branch, customers thought it would be okay to just have firewall and app ID, for example. Now that might have been okay if you were backhauling, but we've already described what the shortcomings of backhauling are. So you backhaul all the traffic to a central location where the full stack exists. That's okay, but from a networking standpoint, the performance is poor to do that. So the security guy's happy, the networking guy's not happy. The networking guy gets his way, that means, or her way, that means the branch can have local breakout or internet access directly from the branch, but there isn't the full stack there. There's only firewall and app ID. So now the networking guy's happy, the security guy's not. So we didn't want that to happen. So no matter how you connect, whether it's from a GlobalProtect agent or an IPsec tunnel from a branch, it doesn't have to be our equipment. When you do connect to the cloud, you have the ability to create whatever policies you want and use the full power of the platform. So that's why we gave you all the subscriptions as part of this. On the GlobalProtect cloud service for mobile users, it's a similar approach where we have the GlobalProtect agents that run on the mobile devices. You connect to the cloud with the two methods that it knows, the two protocols it knows how to talk, which is IPsec or SSL VPN. It automatically chooses. We deploy a GlobalProtect gateway for every customer around the world. So it's not multi-tenant. It's when you sign up for this and you buy this service, you get a set of gateways deployed worldwide. So no matter where you travel, you have a GlobalProtect gateway that's close to where you are. Now, if that gateway needs to scale, because the example I gave before, which is a Snowmageddon event or a conference, it will scale without you having to tell us that you're flying somewhere. It will automatically scale, and when you leave, it'll scale down. That's just part of the service. You don't pay any more or less for that. Now, again, it's managed from Panorama with the plugin. You push the policy, we take care of the rest. I get into details of what you do versus what we do in a couple slides here. But again, it's completely consumed from Panorama, and it includes the same subscriptions and support that we offer for the other use case. One other added benefit here that I'd like to mention that is crucial is that we recognize that customers have an existing investment in Palo Alto Networks hardware and GP subscriptions. And there are many customers that want a hybrid use case. So they want the cloud has some GlobalProtect, but can that augment my existing deployment that I have on-prem? The answer is yes. You can augment the existing infrastructure and deployment and investment you've made in GlobalProtect attached subscriptions, and vice versa. You can also say, I'm happy with my worldwide GlobalProtect deployment that I'm managing myself, but for a DR use case or others that we haven't thought of, I want to be able to burst to the cloud if I need it. You can also do that. So in essence, we can include the GlobalProtect gateways that you've configured and have them part of the cloud service so that when your agents connect, they get both the cloud sources and your gateways in the master list of where to connect. So you also heard about the logging service this morning, and this is a huge piece of this. So and which will be leveraged, as you heard. I'm not going to talk about the other announcement with the application framework, but it heavily uses, of course, the logging service, and so do we. So the logs of the GlobalProtect cloud service feed into the logging service, and this is simply queried from Panorama, because Panorama knows how to talk to a log collector, which we sell today. We sell VM versions, hardware versions of log collectors, and Panorama knows how to query a log collector, and we're leveraging that protocol here. And you'll be able to consume this service in terabyte increments, and there'll be more details TBD on how to buy it and what sizes and so on. So how does this work on the scaling front? Just to kind of illustrate, when you deploy a branch location, so let's say, or a store location, and let's say you have a retail store in San Francisco, and you want to onboard that store, you get to pick in Panorama with the plugin where the cloud firewall lives. So you would pick Northern California, because that's where the store is. So that you have a branch or a store, you pick in the cloud where that should go, and then that's the NorCal location. Furthermore, if you have user movement, so users, you don't get to pick where the cloud firewalls are. We deploy them, like I said, we deploy them everywhere. But if your users happen to move around suddenly and then show up in some part of the world where they weren't before, we automatically add more gateways in those locations or scale the ones that are already there. And again, fully leveraging the capabilities of the cloud. So I want to mention this. This is a very important piece of this as an alternative connection method for onboarding a branch or remote location. So you have IPsec, which is one option, like I mentioned, from any vendor's hardware, but there's also an SD-WAN tie-in, which is more and more getting more and more popular. I'm getting a lot of sort of inbound requests for explaining our integrations. And as you saw in the press release, there was a mention of several vendors that have been tested and certified to work with this service. And the way that works is as follows. If you have branches, let's say there's 4 here, and instead of onboarding each one with an IPsec tunnel, maybe you deployed an SD-WAN device at each one of these locations. SD-WAN devices know how to join, let's just call it an SD-WAN fabric. They know how to join an SD-WAN fabric. They route based on your application-based policy or latency-based policy that you've set in the SD-WAN manager, and they terminate, preferably, into some head-end SD-WAN device, which lives in public cloud. Now, when you do that, the only thing you then need to onboard is this head-end device into our service, of which maybe you might have a dozen, and maybe you have 1,000 branches, but you only have a dozen head-end SD-WAN devices. So you'd have then a dozen IPsec tunnels to our cloud service, securing those connections. But effectively, when you add the 1,001 branch or retail location, it has security automatically there, because as it joins the fabric and tries to talk to anything, internet or another branch or headquarters, it's going through that cloud boundary, which has our service attached. So we can give more details on this going forward, and there's a solutions brief from every one of the SD-WAN vendors that are either already been developed and released or in process of being released as a result of this press release you saw this morning. So it's an alternative connection method to IPsec. So what do we do versus what do you need to do? Lee had a version of this on his slide, and I can go into some more details. So a customer or an MSSP that is helping a customer or doing it on behalf of a customer or a partner still has to manage their on-prem users. So mobile device management, authentication. The security policy is the customer's responsibility because it lives in Panorama on-premise. It's not something that we create for you. You don't open trouble tickets with Palo Alto Networks and we create a security policy for you in a security console. It's your Panorama, your security policy, your logs. You still need to do that. You still need to do your policy creation and management and your log analysis and forensics on those logs. Your on-premise security, so physical and network, is your responsibility, of course. And then lastly, you have to onboard onto the service. So you either onboard with IPsec tunnels or with SD-WAN, and that's your responsibility. After that, then this is where we take over, and we run the infrastructure for you to do the other pieces. We have the GlobalProtect cloud service running, the logging service running, and then within that, if you think about it, you would have had to do these yourself. You would have had to think about content updates. How often do I update the content? And what version of content do I need to upgrade to? PanOS updates. So the general care and feeding of either VM series in public cloud or VM series in private cloud, you'd have to do that yourself. Now, we do that for you. We also we deploy everything in a fault-tolerant configuration. And of course, auto-scaling, we have CloudFormation templates out there today telling you how to do it and what the best practices are, but we've deployed all of that, and we take care of all that infrastructure. So the provisioning of all these firewalls, when you need them, where you need them, is handled by us. And it's entirely a cloud-native architecture on our side for the cloud service. So we're leveraging all the cloud services that are available from the public cloud vendors. And we monitor our own service. So there's some level of monitoring that you do, which is mentioned here. You have to monitor your on-premise equipment and your IPsec tunnel to the cloud service. But we're monitoring our cloud service, and we will have, of course, an SLA. We'll have a site so you can check the health of the service, et cetera. So this is sort of the shared ownership, shared responsibility, if you will, slide. That explains what you used to need to do, and then what do we do? Now, the key takeaway here is the service provides some operational efficiency that otherwise you would have had to take care of, and also it offers a predictable OpEx model that otherwise you would have either had to spend either in CapEx or at best a variable OpEx, not a predictable OpEx. Variable meaning if you decided to do this yourself in AWS or Azure, you'd get a bill every month that's different for your compute and bandwidth charges, of course, and in addition to any security licenses that you have. And with this model, you're buying a 1-year SKU or a 3-year SKU. It's a predictable operational expense, and of course, there's no hardware here, so there's no CapEx. And I'll get into some more details on licensing and how it's consumed. So, when do you consider buying this, and when do you consider deploying this yourself? So I kind of tried to break this up here to describe when you would consider this. I think certainly the speed of deployment is a factor here. Once you have your licenses, and most of you have Panorama already, and which is a requirement for this, you install the plugin. So once you have the plugin and Panorama installed and you have your licenses in hand, literally in 15 minutes, you can have a worldwide GlobalProtect infrastructure deployed. It's that simple. Just like the logging service that Lee showed, the equivalent is true here. So to do that yourself would take a little longer. If you're very proficient at public cloud and you have a bunch of DevOps guys running around that were very proficient in doing it, you could narrow that down to hours, days. If you had to do this yourself with hardware, certainly it's a much longer deployment cycle. So speed of deployment for the GlobalProtect cloud service, definitely to be considered. And if we need to scale automatically, we will detect that, and we'll automatically do it. If you had to detect, for example, if you had a conference coming up, and you'd have to take care of your auto-scaling templates and so on in public cloud to make that happen. So you can do it with AWS and Azure. With hardware on-premise, you can't. You just have to make sure that the capacity is enough to support the users and how many you anticipate having. So the reduced IT footprint is a huge initiative that I hear a lot of, especially in remote locations and retail stores. I want to reduce the IT footprint. I have a router, I have an SD-WAN device, I have a firewall, I have a switch, I have those 5 pieces of hardware. They want to sort of condense that. I hear that a lot. So now you would either need to deploy something that talks IPsec, or as we discussed, something that does SD-WAN. So certainly, if you wanted to reduce it and you had an initiative like that, you could just deploy one device. It could be an SD-WAN device, and the security is in the cloud, as I explained. You could replicate that as well with our VM series in public cloud, but with on-prem gear, you have multiple devices. I see some hands up. We're going to have some time for questions at the end. If you could remember, that'd be great. Thank you. And as I discussed, the predictable OpEx. So predictable OpEx we certainly offer because we're selling 1-year and 3-year SKUs. The best you can get is a variable OpEx model, doing it yourself. And if you require any kind of local segmentation or physical segmentation, so VLAN, vWire, or physical ports in the branch location, of course, we're not there. So we're in the cloud. So either you need to deploy Palo Alto 220 or a VM50 on some UCP device. Something needs to be in the physical location to get that physical separation. So that's where you would consider the other solutions that we offer. And the scope of control. So there's some things that you can do with the solution and some things that you can't. If you want to be in control of the routing in the cloud, of the cloud firewalls and changing IPs and interfaces and routing, we don't give you that control because you control all of this through Panorama, and you cannot log into the cloud instances and manipulate them. If you want to, we have VM series and you could do that yourself, so that's why you would consider doing it yourself if you wanted full control of your environment. This is for if you were okay with the way we would design the service and the simplicity and the reduction in operational burden, then you would go with the service. And then lastly, we are supporting speeds, connection speeds, 10 megabits, 25, 50, 100, up to 300 megs for every remote site. And if you needed anything faster than that, of course, our VM series, we have data sheets on them on what those numbers are. You can build something yourself that's slightly faster. We will expand that perhaps over time, but for now, that's also a consideration of how fast you want those connections to be. So let's look at roughly how it works. Quick overview, and I have a few screenshots at the end to kind of give you a quick walkthrough. So first, you install the licenses and the Panorama plugin is the first thing you need to do. And of course, I mentioned Panorama as a requirement. Next is you onboard the GlobalProtect Cloud Service for remote networks. So we ask you some questions, for example, like what are the subnets behind every remote branch? The typical IPsec setup questions. So you have to define your IPsec tunnels. You got to give us some details on tunnel monitoring and what networks live behind each remote network. Like I said, standard IPsec configuration type questions you're used to seeing. And next, you onboard the GlobalProtect Cloud Service for mobile users. There you define your portal details, your authentication profiles, any certificates, your GlobalProtect IP pools, things that if you've deployed GlobalProtect today, you're very used to what these questions are, and the workflow is nice and simplified, and it's like sort of a guided setup with the plugin. Next, you push this policy and the configuration with a simple commit and push, just like you do today, to the cloud. We've created new device groups in case you're wondering, well, what do I see in Panorama? How does it look? I'll show you that, but in case you're curious, it's just 3 new device groups that you can then select and then push to the cloud. We don't publish down the actual instances or firewalls because we're scaling them, we're changing them often, and that's the best way to show that to you. So you push the policy and configuration to the cloud, and then you connect your site. So you're connecting your mobile devices with the GlobalProtect agent, and you're also finishing up the second half of the IPsec tunnel, which may be from a non-Palo Alto device. It could be a router that you have on-prem. You have to do that IPsec portion. Once you've done that, you're onboarded for both users and remote networks. So now that we've announced this and released this, you might be saying, well, how does this compete with the other vendors that I kind of mentioned that fall in the category of proxy, secure web gateway, secure internet gateway, and so on. So as you know, we have our single pass architecture, which nobody has. So that's something that uniquely Palo Alto does. We secure all ports, all protocols, no matter if you're using a mobile device or if you're connecting from a remote network location, not just web traffic. We have points of presence around the world. Others do too. That's fine. So others have global coverage. We have global coverage as well. The only difference is we're using public cloud. So we can elastically scale and adapt to the user movement, which I explained before is tough for some vendors. It's been some challenges of they've reached capacity in a particular location, so then you're forced to connect somewhere else, which is a little less efficient and adds latency to the overall solution. We are a full bidirectional solution. So it's when you onboard a branch 1 and you onboard branch 2, they can talk to each other. They can also talk to headquarters. Headquarters can talk to them. With other solutions, it's outbound only. It's just an internet gateway service or a secure web gateway. And there is no inbound or full mesh VPN. You still have to deploy something to solve that problem. Either it's MPLS or IPsec tunnels from whatever equipment's there to the headquarters or other branches. You sort of have the same problems you did when you started. So you have this sort of multi-vendor deployment. And we have the same exact policy whether you're on net or off net. When you're on net, you have a Palo Alto firewall. You've deployed the policy and pushed the policy from Panorama. When you go off net, the policy you've pushed from the same Panorama is running in the cloud, and we're enforcing that policy. So when you connect with an agent, with a GlobalProtect agent or an app, GlobalProtect app on your phone, you have the same policy running. And we're, out of all vendors, if you think about it, that offer a service like this, they don't make firewalls for the data center. They don't make perimeter firewalls. They don't make data center firewalls. We're one of the only unique companies that make hardware, make VM series, and offer a service like this. So we can secure all the locations, whether it's for private cloud or perimeter or in this case, the GlobalProtect cloud service. And we have one single pane of glass to manage all of it, which would be Panorama, of course. So from Panorama, same policy to and pushing to all those assets is unique. So is this this is sold through the channel? You buy the SKUs normally like you normally would through distribution through the channel with 1 year and 3 year SKUs. I go over a couple of examples here shortly, and we are not. It's as I mentioned, a shared ownership model. You have some responsibility still. We take over some security infrastructure that now you no longer need to build and do the care and feeding of yourself. And so, in summary, it's an alternative to what you can already do today. You can buy our hardware. You can buy VM series. This is another alternative. Again, we have customers building it themselves because they have a special use case where they want that full control. It goes back to that chart I showed you of why you would decide to buy this versus not. And the key takeaways are the operational efficiency and the predictable OpEx. So some details here. The pricing structure for the remote networks. Remote networks are being sold with a pool of bandwidth. So the pool of bandwidth, the ranges is 200 megs to 100,000 megs or 100 gigs. And it's a tiered model. So the bigger pool you buy, the more built-in discount there is. And then when you go to deploy a firewall, you choose in the plugin what that speed is, 10 megs, 25, 50, 100, or 300. And if you want to upgrade it, it's not another phone call to a sales rep or channel to a reseller. You can just pick from the drop down, this site needs to go from 10 megs to 25. And you can upgrade it yourself. It just decrements from your pool faster until you've exhausted the pool. On the GlobalProtect cloud service for mobile users, we're selling this by mobile users. So if you have 5,000 employees with laptops and phones, you buy 5,000 seats. Doesn't matter how many devices they have. We're keeping it simple. Doesn't matter how many tunnels those devices generates. It's just one user, and that's all we care about. That's all we count. It's easy to understand, sell, scale, size, etc. And there are no changes to the GlobalProtect subscription that I mentioned earlier. That part is unchanged. You could still buy GlobalProtect and attach it to VM series or to your hardware firewalls. So it's ideally suited for, kind of touched on it throughout the presentation, but customers that have many remote locations or many remote users, medium to large enterprise, very large enterprise with a large number of regional offices, headquarters, branch offices, and certainly distributed retail for sure. So gas stations, fast food, normal retail, brick and mortar stores. And the requirements are there will be a Panorama minimum requirement. So there'll be 804, let's say, it will be 804 Panorama that you would require. You'd require the plugin, the first version of the plugin, since it has not been available up until this point. And you would need the licenses or auth codes for the GlobalProtect cloud service. And of course, the logging service as well. And I have some examples here going through sort of typical customer scenarios after I just described the tiered pricing structure quickly. So back to the pools. Let's say these are the pool ranges, let's say 200 to 999 megabits per second. If you bought 200, that means you could deploy 20 stores or 20 branch offices or 20 remote locations of 10 megs, 4 of 50 or 2 of 100. It's up to you how you split it up, and you can upgrade at any time, but your pool is 200. And you pay a certain price if you're in that range. If you go over 1,000 megabits, you're in the next price range, and so on and so forth. The price generally goes down as you buy a bigger and bigger pool size. Now, some key points here. These are the ways you can configure it, as I mentioned. And you pay for what you deploy, not what you end up using. So it's like an ISP at home. You have a 50 meg link at home. You don't call your ISP at the end of the month. You're saying, hey, I only use 10 megs of it. What happens to the other 20? It's just that's the service. So if you deployed and you bought a pool for 1,000 megabits and you've configured for 500 meg and you either used or haven't used the remainder, that's not how the solution works. The service works. It's much like an ISP. Just think of it like an ISP, and it works the same way. For the mobile users, it's the same tiered structure. So 200 is on the low side, 200,000 plus, and it's in the same tiers. So you pay a lower price the more users you buy. You could, of course, kind of jump from tier to tier as you trade in the remainder or do co-terms and things like that. Users, again, as many devices as the user has. We don't count the number of tunnels. What we do count is the number of unique users in the last 90 days. That's so we can be fair to you if you have contractors that sort of come and go or employees that leave. It's sort of a 90-day, a 3-month window in time. That's sort of a buffer that moves. So it's an accurate count of how many users are using the system. That's not something you need to deliberately do. It's just how we're counting it. So some examples. If you have a large consulting firm, for example, they have 75,000 remote users around the world, just traveling all the time. They're never in an office, always road warriors, always have a laptop. And they decided they want 10 terabytes of cloud storage for logging. So because it's 75,000 users, it falls into tier F in this range, and you buy this SKU 75,000 times. So one line item on a PO, not 75,000 line items. I'm not trying to scare anybody. So one line item 75,000 times is the quantity on that line item. And then you buy the logging service, you'd buy 10 times 1 terabyte, for example, for that. So we're trying to keep it simple. Another case here is very large enterprise, slightly more complicated, where you have 15,000 remote users, 100 remote offices at 25 megabits per second each, 10 regional offices that are slightly larger with 100 meg links, WAN links apiece, and they decided they need 20 terabytes of logging based on their retention needs, for example. So there's 15,000 users. It falls squarely in the, pretty much in the middle of this tier D, and they pay whatever price that is. Then for the remote locations, it's 3,500 megabits if you add it all up. And they fall in tier B for that. So they buy this SKU 15,000 quantity and quantity 3,500 there, and then 20 times 1 terabyte for the logging. So 3 line items on an order to solve this case here. Distributed retail, let's just say you had lots of retail stores, 4,000 retail stores. Generally, retail stores have a 25 meg or less WAN link speeds, some slightly higher, some much lower, even some sub 5 megs. So let's say 10 megs each, 2 terabytes of logging. So again, tier E, 40,000 quantity for that, for the megabits that you need to buy, and 2 by 1 terabytes. So I think a relatively flexible license model, so you can pick the speed yourself in the plugin and adjust it as you need without having to kind of go through a painful code term to adjust the speed of a site, but you buy the pools, and once you exhaust your pool, then you can go do the code term process or trade in or upgrade to the next higher tier. So really quickly, just some visuals on what this looks like. You have the plugin architecture in Panorama. The menu is kind of long, so I just kind of took a snip. That's where you add plugins in Panorama. We added a plugin here called Cloud Services. And when you add that, you then get additional functionality in the UI. So there's a whole new menu that shows up here, Cloud Services with status and configuration. So we show you the components of the service. We kind of guide you through what you need to configure first. These are grayed out, because the first thing you need to do is set up a service connection. What a service connection is basically an IPsec tunnel from the cloud back to headquarters. Why back to headquarters? Because your authentication servers are most likely there, and most likely you have assets that you want your users and remote locations to connect to and get to. So that's what a service connection is. How you onboard that, essentially, it's very similar to a remote network, so I kind of combined the steps here for the presentation. Service connection setup and remote network setup is very, very similar. We allow you to create a template stack. Template stack, if you're familiar with Panorama and how it works, is you might have templates already created in Panorama. You create a new template stack, pulling your templates that you already use so that you can cherry pick some of those values and reuse them without having to re-enter those values. So you create a template stack, and you also create in a particular device group that you already have, which is associated with a policy, we create a child device group inside it called, in this case, remote network device group here. So this inherits the policy of your parent device group, so you don't have to recreate your rules, of course, because I promised you're pushing the same rule base from Panorama to the cloud as you are on-prem, and that's how we do that. And then the next step is you map your zones. So in your policy, you might have many zones because that's relevant to your on-prem configuration. You have DMZ, guest Wi-Fi, LAN, and so on. Lots of zones, and you've configured those zones. But in the cloud, we just have an IPsec tunnel from your on-premise to the cloud, and then the cloud has an internet connection or going to other branches. We have a concept of trust and untrust, and we have you map your zones in your policy to those 2 zones, and you do that here. And then here's where you configure the IPsec tunnel to either the service connection, which is headquarters, or to branch offices. And that's just standard IPsec workflow that you're used to seeing in Panorama. So that's how you onboard service connections and remote networks. So then those 2 are set up. In this example, there's 218 branch offices and 3 headquarters locations. The next thing you would do is then configure mobile users. So this is the GlobalProtect for with the agents that you're used to seeing. So there, it's very similar. Template stacks and zone mapping. I described template stacks and device groups and zone mapping. And here, the only difference here in questions are the portal configuration. So you have a couple of options. You either allow us to host the portal with a domain that we have, so globalprotectcloudservice.com, something like that, and you give us a host name, or it's your company, so of course you might want it to be hosted as gp.yourcompanydomain.com, in which case we need more information, certificate and so on and so forth. So we solicit all that from you in the plugin workflow to set up a portal. And then once you exit from this workflow and you've given us the IP pools you want for your GP users and any DNS configurations and so on, this is the resulting configuration. Now when you hit, when you configure that, then there's the status of that fully configured. And the logging service only asks you one question today, which is Americas or EMEA. Like Lee pointed out, we have 2 locations that we're offering the logging service in when we launch this, or when we release it. Then all you need to do then is commit and push your changes. As you've noticed for the keeners in the audience, we've added a new tab here that Panorama does not have today, GlobalProtect Cloud Service, so it's a push scope addition. And then you have 3 selections here. So you can select the service connections, remote network locations, or mobile users. And when you push those device groups to the cloud, we enforce those policies. And then that's how we get your policy to the cloud. Now once it's there, you have a status. Just to give you a tour of this, we have status, monitoring, and network details. On our monitoring tab, you have several radio buttons here for, if you select remote network locations, it'll show you where around the world you've deployed remote network locations, so your stores or your branches, and what are the peers that are running in the cloud. This is not the location of where your branch is, it's the location of what you've chosen for the peer running in the cloud, and some statistics on that. So what is the throughput, what's the rate limit, so 300 megs if that's what you've chosen, and then how much you've gone over that limit or not. And you have similar screens for the mobile users and logging service. So once you've done that and everything is configured, then you just connect with your client with, let's say, mobile, a MacBook or something like that. You have the GlobalProtect icon here. You select that and put in the portal that you've configured, either our domain, so ending in GlobalProtect Cloud Service, or your own domain that you've configured, and that gets you connected. So in a very, very short period of time, I've tried this. The first time I tried it, to just onboard GlobalProtect only, literally just took me 15 minutes with the auth codes in hand. The time you answered a couple portal questions and hit commit and push, and then you just look at the status screen and the yellow bubbles start turning green because the deployment is complete, and you had a working GlobalProtect configuration. It's very cool if you've used our stuff and you're familiar with it. So there's a booth at Ignite on the main floor. It's in that first section on the left. It's GlobalProtect Cloud Service. We have a demo of more on the management, kind of how to configure it if you have any sort of deep dive questions. So feel free to come to the booth and take a look. And there's now, since we announced this morning, there's some collateral on the website and a main landing page here, GlobalProtect/GlobalProtect, the white paper data sheet, and there's a video that's going to be published shortly. So thank you. I know there was at least one question. A gentleman had his hand up, and if there's any more, I think we're doing okay on time. Yep.
Regarding the support of the SD-WAN vendors, are you showing it?
It was in the press release today. Oh, you tried to find it? So from memory, in the press release today, we have Nuage was mentioned, Viptel was mentioned, VeloCloud was mentioned, VMware was mentioned, Aruba was mentioned, and don't quote me if I forgot one. But please read the press release. They're there. That was in addition to the existing SD-WAN vendor relationships that we have. So there's the SD-WAN vendors we've tested with this service. Those are the ones I just mentioned. And that adds to the list of SD-WAN vendors we already have, which are also mentioned in the press release, like Riverbed, Silver Peak, and others. Okay? Yes?
Kind of related to the question, since we have the logging service in the cloud and GlobalProtect in the cloud, are there any plans or designs to move Panorama itself as a cloud-based service?
Perhaps, but that's not something that I'm managing, so not free to talk about that. Yeah, yep. We can follow up. Yep. Sure, go ahead. Also, white labeling or reselling. So we have some service providers looking to buy this service, run a panorama, either one panorama or multiple panoramas, so multiple instances of the service for which you're running on behalf of each one of your customers, you can do that. Or run one single panorama and then have customer one connected to one branch firewall and so on, just depending on your go-to-market model. We're looking at how to more tightly integrate the requirements of service providers with this service. So more sort of APIs or more of a white labeling, which I believe is what you're asking. Yeah.
So do you aggregate the internet bandwidth from your cloud out to the regular internet?
No, this infrastructure is running in cloud, so as soon as you connect to it, it's immediately egressing out.
So if we have 10 sites with 10 meg each, that's 100 meg bandwidth that you're going to SLA, and you're going to guarantee that bandwidth out to the internet from your cloud?
Yeah, so if you deploy a site and you've picked 10 megs, right, for a particular branch location, we actually set 25% over what it is you've configured as a burst allowance. So if you configure 10 megs, it's really 12 and a half. So for every one of those sites, no matter what policy you create for that branch firewall or for that location, whether it's SSL decrypt, full threat, SSL, et cetera, we'll guarantee that's 10 megs, and then we'll allow you to go 2.5 over for each one of the sites. So,
Say they want to go to Yahoo from your cloud.
yes.
Guarantee that you can aggregate all that bandwidth out.
It's not even aggregated, it's single. So we guarantee if you deploy to site, it's 10, it will do 10 no matter where the destination is. If the destination is internet or the destination is back to another branch, it's still 10. Sorry, can you hear?
Become a transit, like you connect to multiple ISPs. I mean, that's where if it's VPN into the cloud,
Uh-huh.
how does it get to yahoo.com?
Well, we netted behind a public address for our service. So if you have policies, our service, yes, our service. So if you connect to our service on an IPsec tunnel from a branch, trying to go to Yahoo or Google, you're obviously going to egress out of our firewalls that are running in the cloud, and we will NAT the source and get you to the internet. That's just a normal flow.
You provide the internet service.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Over at.
For sure. Yes. Yep. The source address from your branch office? Yes, if you are looking, if you go to What's My IP, for example, and you're behind a branch, you'll see that your IP is whatever we have on the cloud as a public address. The private addresses, of course, come from your branch location. We don't, as long as you don't NAT them, we don't NAT them. But of course, when you go to the internet as the final destination, we have to do a source NAT of that so it can obviously return back. That's normal. To go to another branch, it's not NATed. Yes, that's a good point. So geolocation issues, there are some geolocation issues depending on where you are. So that we have some locations today, which there's 14 locations. If you are in a region where when you egress out, it is in your language, then that's okay. And if the closest region is not in the country, you may get, let's say, a localization where Google is in a different language, and you would switch. That does happen now, and as we augment the service, that will decrease over time. I believe that's what you're asking, right? Yeah. Sorry? You pick where it is. So if you're in France and you onboard location, there's 14 locations. Currently, there isn't any in France. The ones that are in Europe are the closest one to you would be, let's say, London, or there's Frankfurt or Ireland, for example. And then there is France coming soon. Is that where you are? You're in France, or all over? Okay. Yeah. Well, the headquarters to cloud isn't an outbound connection. It's an inbound connection. So from the cloud service to headquarters is inbound. It's not we're not selling or targeting this service to be an outbound headquarters internet connection or internet service. You can. It's not an outbound service. So of course, you're utilizing it because that's your ISP, right? So the inbound connection is limited by all the branch firewalls at their first point into the service. The part that connects to you is, we don't necessarily restrict. We don't have to, because it's restricted where you actually connect in the first place, which would be the users or those branch locations that are first onboarding, if you know what I mean. Yeah. If a branch has a public IP address, meaning internally? So as long as we can route to it and it's unique, then, and you can establish an IPsec tunnel to us, we will route back to it. But you're using internally behind a firewall public addresses on the branch. That's interesting. I'd like to talk about that use case and understand it afterwards, if you don't mind. Yeah. Yeah. There's a question. Yes. Sort of can hear you.
If you're acting as the ISP for my mobile workforce, if I have mobile users that are present in a country that has a legal restriction requiring local internet offload in that country?
The policy, so the policy is in your hands. So don't forget, like I mentioned, GlobalProtect has some very rich capabilities on what to exclude when, for which groups, from which devices. All of that is not controlled by us. It's actually controlled by you. So yeah. So gateway selection is also, this is where the hybrid approach, we have the cloud augmenting your let's say, hardware existing GP deployments, or vice versa. So this hybrid approach allows you to, and you can control whether the users can choose a gateway or it's auto-selected. That also is not enforced by us. That's a selection that you can tweak. So you can have your users override it and say, all right, I want to connect to this particular gateway because I'm in this country, right? Or I want the cloud to auto-select it. That's actually a setting that you choose. Yeah. Do we have time for any more questions? No, we're done. I got the we're over the time. Sorry. You can catch me afterwards. We're over the time. Thank you. Thanks everybody.